I thought the feeling of being watched was just my guilt, a paranoia born from my secret afternoons in a lover's bed. I was wrong. The eyes following me were real. They belonged to a private investigator, and the person who had hired him, the one who now held the video of my every sin, was my own husband's mother. The affair with Miles was a fever I couldn't break. It was a rebellion against the quiet, predictable comfort of my life with Owen. Owen was a good man. He was my home, my safety, my Sunday morning coffee. But Miles was the intoxicating chaos of a Saturday night, a dangerous, beautiful storm that made me feel alive. Our stolen moments were a secret addiction, a series of clandestine meetings in dimly lit hotel bars and anonymous apartments across the city. I told myself it was just a physical thing, a temporary escape from the monotony of my otherwise perfect marriage. I was a fool and a liar. The guilt, of course, was a constant companion. It manifested as a low-grade paranoia, a persistent, chilling feeling of being watched. When I was with Miles, I'd find myself scanning the room, my eyes darting towards unfamiliar faces. A man sitting alone at the bar, a dark car parked across the street. They all felt like threats. "You're being paranoid, Sienna," Miles would say, his hand tracing a soothing path down my back. "No one is watching us." I let myself believe him, attributing the fear to my own guilty conscience, but the real threat wasn't a stranger. It was a woman who was a constant, smiling presence in my life, my mother-in-law, Eleanor. On the surface, Eleanor was the perfect matriarch, elegant, poised, and fiercely devoted to her son. But underneath the polite smiles and perfectly coiffed hair, there was a core of steel. She had never, not once, made me feel like I was truly part of her family. I was the woman who had taken her precious Owen, her compliments always had. A slight edge, her questions about my career felt like interrogations. I had always felt her eyes on me, judging, weighing, and finding me wanting. The emotional affair had started there, in the cold, critical space Eleanor had created in my marriage. I often felt like I was failing some unspoken test. This feeling of inadequacy had pushed me in part towards the easy, unconditional adoration I found with Miles, with him. I was not Owen's wife, the woman who wasn't quite good enough for his mother. I was just Sienna, a desirable, exciting woman. The seduction was in the escape he offered, not just from my marriage, but from my mother-in-law's suffocating orbit. Little did I know, the very woman I was trying to escape was the one orchestrating my downfall, watching my every move. From the shadows, patiently waiting for me to make the mistake that would allow her to reclaim her son. The net began to close unsteadily, a series of seemingly innocent questions and comments from Eleanor that were, in reality, carefully placed traps. We were at our weekly family dinner, a tense, mandatory affair. Owen, blissfully unaware, was recounting a story from work. I was playing the part of the doting wife, laughing at the right moments, while my mind was replaying a conversation I'd had with Miles just hours before. "Sienna, dear," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the chatter as smooth and sharp as glass. "You look a little tired. Long week at the office?" "Something like that," I replied, forcing a smile. "Yes." "Owen was telling me you've had a lot of late nights recently," she continued, her eyes pinning me down. "Must be a very demanding project." Her words were perfectly polite. but they were laced with an unspoken accusation. I felt a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. She was letting me know that she was tracking my lies. The guilt was becoming a physical burden, making me clumsy and forgetful. I'd leave my phone on silent, missing Owen's calls, then have to invent flimsy excuses. The distance between us grew, a silent, desolate space filled with my secrets. Owen, bless his heart, thought my moodiness was due to work stress. He would try to comfort me, to draw me out, but every loving gesture from him only amplified my feeling of being a fraud. The paranoia, which I had tried to dismiss, came roaring, back with a vengeance. The dark sedan I'd noticed before seemed to be everywhere parked down the street from my office, behind me in traffic. One afternoon, I was meeting Miles at a small, secluded park. It was our spot, a place we thought was safe. We were sitting on a bench, our conversation intense, our hands clasped between us. Suddenly, I saw him, a nondescript man in a gray coat, sitting on a bench across the pond, seemingly reading a newspaper. But his gaze kept flicking towards us. It was the same man I had seen at the coffee shop weeks ago. I froze, my hand tightening. On Miles's. "We have to go," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What? Why?" "That man. I've seen him before. He's watching us." Miles followed my gaze, a frown on his face. He tried to reassure me, to tell me it was a coincidence, but the panic in my eyes was undeniable. We left immediately, a cloud of fear and suspicion hanging over what was supposed to be a romantic escape. The thrill of the affair was beginning to be eclipsed by the terror of being hunted. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't understand. A game where the rules were being written by an invisible, malevolent player. I just didn't know yet that the player was my own mother-in-law. The end came in the form of a family intervention. Eleanor summoned us to her perfectly decorated, oppressively quiet house on a Sunday afternoon. The pretense was a simple family tea, but the moment I walked in and saw the grave, somber expressions on both her and Owen's faces, I knew it was an ambush. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. There was no escape. We sat in her formal living room, the air thick with an unholy silence. Owen wouldn't look at me. He just stared at his hands, his face pale and broken. Eleanor, on the other hand, looked directly at me, her eyes cold, triumphant, like a predator who has finally cornered its prey. She didn't start with accusations. She began with a sickeningly sweet performance of a concerned mother. "Sienna," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "Owen and I are very worried about you. You haven't been yourself lately. You've been distant, secretive." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. And now we know why. My mouth went dry. This was it. The moment I had been dreading for months. Before I could form a denial, a lie, any defense at all, she reached for a sleek silver tablet. On the coffee table, she tapped the screen, and the room was filled with the sounds of my own voice. My own laughter, but it was a sound I didn't recognize, a sound of carefree, illicit joy. She had played a video. It was a montage, a professionally shot and edited highlight reel of my affair with Miles. The quality was crystal clear. There we were, kissing in his car on a rainy night. There we were, walking hand in hand into a hotel, my head resting on his shoulder. There we were, laughing at that cafe, looking at each other with an intimacy that was undeniable. The cheating scene wasn't a single grainy photograph. It was a feature film of my betrayal. I watched, frozen in a state of absolute dissociative horror. It was like watching a movie about a stranger who wore my face. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a hot, searing wave that washed over me, leaving me cold and trembling. I finally tore my eyes from the screen and looked at Owen. His face was a landscape of pure, unadulterated devastation. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, his expression that of a man who was watching his entire world burn to the ground. He wasn't just heartbroken, he was shattered, humiliated. His wife's infidelity had been presented to him by his own mother like a business presentation. The video ended. Eleanor switched off the tablet, the sudden silence deafening. She looked at me, a single perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised in a gesture of final, victorious judgment. There was nothing left to say. The evidence was absolute, my guilt undeniable. My secret life had been captured, edited, and presented for viewing. My affair was no longer a secret. It was a spectacle. The immediate aftermath of the video was a silent, emotional war zone. Owen was a wreck, incapable of speech, his body shaking with silent sobs. I tried to reach for him to say his name, but Eleanor cut me off with a single, icy glare. She was in complete control, the triumphant general of a war she had secretly waged and decisively won. "There's nothing to discuss," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She was no longer speaking to me. She was addressing her son, her words a soothing balm on a wound she had intentionally inflicted. "She has made a fool of you, Owen, of our family. She needs to leave, now." I finally found my voice, a ragged, desperate whisper. "Owen, please, let me talk to you, alone." But Owen couldn't even look at me. He was a child again, broken and seeking refuge in his mother's strength. He just shook his head, his face buried in his hands. He had completely ceded his power to her. I wasn't just facing my heartbroken husband. I was facing his mother, my judge, jury, and executioner. "He doesn't want to talk to you," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You have lost that right. You will pack a small bag with your essentials, and you will leave this house. The rest of your things will be sent to you. Do you understand?" The emotional storm that erupted was not one of rage, but of a desperate, suffocating helplessness. I was being exiled, cast out of my own life by this woman who had always seen me as an intruder. My affair, as wrong as it was, had been my own secret, my own mistake. But she had taken it, weaponized it, and used it to publicly humiliate me and shatter her own son, all under the guise of protecting him. The breakdown was absolute. I started to cry, not for the loss of my marriage, which I knew was over, but for the sheer, calculated cruelty of it all. I pleaded with Owen, begging him to look at me, to speak to me, to be my husband for one last moment. But he was a ghost, a hollowed-out man being puppeteered by his mother's will. The hard choice wasn't mine to make. My choices had led me here, but the final, decisive action was being taken by Eleanor. She stood up, a signal that the meeting was over. "I'll drive you back to the house so you can pack," she said, her tone that of a warden escorting a prisoner. I had walked into that house a wife. I was walking out a pariah. I had lost my husband, my home, my dignity, all in the space of a 10-minute video. I had been having an affair with one man, but I realized in that moment that I had been in a war with a completely different adversary all along, and she had just won. I left that day, my life crammed into a single suitcase. The door to the home I had shared with Owen closed behind me with a quiet finality. The days that followed were a blur of cheap motels and the hollow ache of absolute loneliness. I called Miles, my lover, the man for whom I had risked everything. His reaction was a cold dose of reality. He was sympathetic, but he was also distant, cautious. The thrill of our secret affair was one thing. The messy, public drama of a divorce, complete with a private investigator and a vindictive mother-in-law, was another. He was a fantasy, an escape, and he had no place in the ugly wreckage of my real life. Our connection, which had felt so powerful, in the shadows, dissolved in the harsh light of consequence. I was truly, completely alone. And in that solitude, the emotional twist, a final, devastating realization began to crystallize. This was never about my affair. My cheating was just the weapon Eleanor had been waiting for me to hand her. Her goal was not to protect her son's heart. Her goal was to reclaim her son. I had never been a daughter to her. I had been a rival, an intruder who had taken the primary position in her son's life. She had not exposed my affair to save Owen from a cheating wife. She had exposed it to get rid of me, to restore herself to her rightful place as the most important woman in his world. Doubt my breakdown was the quiet, chilling understanding of her long game. I had been a pawn in a war one didn't even know I was fighting. My revenge, I decided, would not be loud or vengeful. It would be a final, quiet act of truth. A week after I left, I sent a single handwritten letter to Owen. It was not an apology. It was a warning. Owen, it began. What I did was unforgivable, and I will live with that guilt forever. I broke your heart, and I accept the consequences of that, but I need you to understand what was done to us. Your mother did not do this to protect you. She did this to possess you. I was a problem she needed to solve, a rival she needed to vanquish. Now that I am gone, she has won. I have lost you, and I deserve that, but please do not lose yourself. Do not spend the rest of your life as her prize, her perfectly controlled son. I hope one day you find a love that she cannot touch. I never knew if he read it. I never heard from him again. I moved to a new city, started a new life, a life of quiet anonymity. The story ends with me, months later, sitting in a small, empty apartment, watching the rain fall outside my window. I am free from my marriage, free from my affair, free from Eleanor's suffocating presence. But I am haunted by the knowledge that I was just collateral damage in a different kind of love story, the toxic, obsessive love of a mother for her. Summed up, my mother-in-law used my affair to destroy my marriage and reclaim her son. She played the hero, and I was cast as the villain. But in the quiet of his new life, I wonder if he ever realizes he just traded one prison for another. So tell M.E. who is the real other woman in my marriage, my lover or his mother.